Well, welcome everyone to the road to COP28. While electing Dems in 2024 is key to the global climate agenda. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, please like this video and follow Democrats Abroad on Facebook. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The countdown to the 2024 elections has begun, and you can begin to by requesting your absentee ballot for the 2024 elections in January. You can add a calendar reminder that will be shared in the chat.
I think we're going to share this in the chat now with Brett. And
it's shared.
So welcome everybody to our global webinar, The Road to COP28. I am Dana Freeling, the chair of Democrats Abroad Environment and Climate Crisis Council, a Texas voter, and calling in from my home in Finland. We are thrilled to have with us today Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts and Michelle Deatrick, the chair of the DNC's Council on the Environment and Climate Crisis. As we head into the United Nations Conference of Parties in Dubai, the United States and other world participants face critical issues in phasing out fossil fuels and adapting to the climate crisis. We are now also 1 year out from the pivotal U.S. 2024 elections, where not only democracy and other vital freedoms are on the ballot, but so too is the future of U.S. climate policy and the viability of our planetary health. Positive momentum since the Biden-Harris election must continue to meet our commitments to the Paris Agreement and limit warming to 1.5 degrees. The rollback of Democratic policies under Republicans would set us back decades and jeopardize the security of life on Earth. This was indeed a year of climate reckoning. Recent studies show that the last 12 months were the hottest in at least 125,000 years. The question is, can we stem the tide? A green revolution is certainly underway, much in thanks to Democrats' historic legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, and other efforts. We're breaking records with the pace of clean energy deployment and cost declines, adding more renewables in the next 5 years than we did in the last 20. We are finally taking action, but the planet is changing too, perhaps more rapidly. Population growth across the globe has meant that pollution has not actually decreased. The fossil fuel industry is expected to spend $500 billion to bring new oil and gas online this year. And according to the IMF, we continue to subsidize the industry to the tune of $7 trillion annually. This seems to be an age of energy addition as opposed to transition. New demand is supplemented with clean energy, but emissions are still rising worldwide. And that is what the planet cares about. Global nations must meet this challenge together, but we cannot solve climate change without U.S. leadership in decarbonization and finance. The world's energy and economic systems can be transformed, with the UN COP parties as a chrysalis for that change. But time is running out. We're really looking forward to hearing from our panelists regarding these complex and critical questions. Now, I am so proud to introduce our international chair, Martha McDevitt-Pugh. In addition to her marked impact on LGBTQ+ rights for overseas Americans, Martha is also a champion of the environment. She was an original signatory to the DNC's Council on the Environment and Climate Crises as a DNC member, and was also a vital force in helping us at Democrats Abroad establish its own council. Leading the charge and helping our community once again be the margin of victory in U.S. elections, I give you our splendid leader, Martha.
Thank you so much, Dana, and it's really great to be here today. And of course, a huge thanks to Senator Markey, who I think will join us any minute, for joining us today, and Michelle Deatrick of the DNC Environmental and Climate Crisis Council, and also so glad that our own Democrats Abroad, ECCC, is organizing this meeting today. So thanks to everyone in the audience for joining. Democrats Abroad is mobilizing now for the 2024 elections, and we're going to be holding our own in-person and by-mail primary elections, our GPP, starting on Super Tuesday. There is so much at stake, and we're positioned as Americans abroad to, again, make a difference in the close elections that we see time and again in our country. There are many critical issues on the ballot in the 2024 cycle, including democracy itself. Issues around the climate directly impact the future of our planet, of communities around the globe, and many who are already seeing the impact of the climate crisis. Climate is an issue that speaks to so many core Democratic constituencies, and we are here to make sure that we speak to this critical issue. One way you can help get out the word to Americans around the world and make sure that they know how to get their ballots wherever they live and return them is by donating to Democrats Abroad. We have a state-of-the-art help desk. We'll be engaging and mobilizing voters all around the world to expand the electorate and win elections. And you can donate to Democrats Abroad at www.democratsabroad.org/donate. Thank you again for who you are and everything you do. I'm really looking forward to the webinar.
Thank you, Martha. Now we will have Angela will introduce, maybe Sam will go first and introduce Michelle, and while we wait for Senator Markey to join.
Sure. Michelle Deatrick is the founder and national chair of the first ever DNC Council on the Environment and Climate Crisis. She is a battleground state organizer, a labor advocate, a policy analyst, and a national environmental leader. Michelle serves on the National Advisory Boards for Climate Power and 1.5 Climate Pledge, and on the Ecology Center and the Huron Valley Workers Organizing and Research Center boards. She chairs her county's environmental council, which she founded. A recent county commissioner who flipped a rural multi-term red seat to blue, and a former Peace Corps volunteer, Michelle is the Michigan chair of the National Writers Union and a member of UAW Local 2320. She is also an internationally recognized poet and the Chautauqua Poetry Award winner. She lives on her family's 80-acre farm in Rewilded Prairie in Michigan. We might add, Michelle has been a vital ally and friend to Democrats Abroad and the work we do here in connecting climate with voting issues from abroad. Thank you so much for joining us, Michelle.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sam.
Perhaps we can give an introduction of Senator Markey while we're waiting to hear from him.
Hold on. Senator Ed Markey is in the audience. I'm just promoting him to
wonderful.
panelist.
That is wonderful.
Hold on. Let him turn his video on. Please try your video, Senator.
Right there.
Wonderful.
Welcome, Senator.
It's very great to see you. It is my pleasure to introduce Senator Ed Markey. He is a lawyer, politician, and former Army reservist who now serves as the U.S. Senator for Massachusetts since 2013. As a member of the Democratic Party, he has served 20 terms as a congressman from Massachusetts until he was elected to the Senate. Markey is a progressive focused on climate change and energy policy, and was the chair of the House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming from 2007 to 2011. Senator Markey is a national leader on energy, the environment, climate change, and has authored legislation that addresses the energy, economic, and national security challenges associated with increasing carbon pollution. Then Representative Markey co-authored the Waxman-Markey Clean Energy and Security Act, the only comprehensive climate bill ever to be passed in a chamber of Congress at that time. He was the Senate author of the Green New Deal, Senator Markey has observed COP negotiations several times and continues to provide the strongest leadership in our elected body to meet the climate crisis. We cannot think of a better champion of climate issues from a sitting federal U.S. elected representative than the senator, and we are deeply honored to have him today.
Wow, thank you so much. And where are you right now, Angela?
I'm in Germany.
In Germany, beautiful. So I think all of you abroad know that the United States was being charged with hypocrisy on climate change. You know, say the right thing, not do the right thing. And you also know that you can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't tell the rest of the world to reduce greenhouse gases if the United States itself is not doing it. And so that's why Joe Biden's presidency has been so historically important, because Joe Biden led the effort that made it possible for us to pass the Inflation Reduction Act last year. Now, Joe Manchin did support it. He didn't want it to be called the most important climate bill ever passed in any country at one time. So we wanted to call it the Inflation Reduction Act, and it will reduce inflation. It will reduce energy costs, but it's actually not $369 billion, because Goldman and Credit Suisse have now done an analysis of the legislation to determine that it's somewhere between $800 billion and $1.2 trillion in tax breaks, in programs that are going to be created, and unleashing another $5 or $6 trillion of private sector investment. So the revolution is on. The United States is leading the way. Joe Biden is the guy who finally got this historic legislation across the finish line. Now, as Angela said, I did introduce the Green New Deal with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just 4.5 years ago, which created the movement that created the momentum that created the moment, because the issue had become so big that the Inflation Reduction Act, the climate bill, was possible. Let me contrast that, by the way, because you're all politically savvy people. In 2016, no reporter asked Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump a question about climate change, if you can imagine that. And it was really upsetting to young people in our country. Well, we've fixed that problem now. And, you know, people say to me, do you know who Speaker Mike Johnson is in the new House of Representatives from Louisiana? And to be honest with you, I don't know him, but he knows me. How do I know that? Because in the 2 or 3 months right after I introduced the Green New Deal, he actually, as chair of the Republican Senate Policy Committee, did a 13-page report on the Green New Deal, essentially saying, oh, it's going to ruin the world as we know it. Well, it is going to upset oil and gas people in Louisiana, but it has energized young people here and given President Biden and his team the credibility to go to other countries to say, heading into Dubai, heading into the climate summit in just another month, that the United States is back. We're not the laggards anymore. We're the leaders, and we want to encourage every other country to meet their commitments on this issue. So, because of President Biden and his ability to win the election, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new union jobs. We're going to make sure that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities are included. And we're going to have dramatic reduction in greenhouse gases as well. So we have to get President Biden reelected in 2024, because whether it be Donald Trump, who gets his degree in climate science from Trump University, or Speaker Johnson, their first bit of business is going to be to take all of the progress we made and repeal it. So that's why what's happening over the next 12 months is going to be so central to the well-being of the planet. And by the way, the planet's on the ballot next November. It's the most important election for the planet of all time. And if we get Joe Biden reelected, And when we check in on January 20th, 2029, all of these programs will have taken root. All of the progress will have been made. The rest of the world will have responded. So this is the pivotal time, and thank all of you for your interest in this project.
Thank you so much, Senator Markey. You actually answered our first question, which was, why is electing Democrats in 24 so key to the global climate agenda? And why are the commitments under the Biden administration to reduce emissions and finance mitigation and adaptation measures, both at home and abroad, so important?
Well, again, the thing is, the Democrats, in contrast to Republicans, we actually believe in science.
Yeah.
So, and we believe that we can put together a plan for massive job creation. We can save all of creation by engaging in massive domestic job creation. So it's imperative that we keep Joe Biden so we can finish this and maintain now the credibility that we have across the planet. So I guess I'm going to keep coming back to that as the central point. But
yeah, it's pretty key. I'd like to ask Michelle Deatrick to chime in. She's working on this from a different perspective. I think you all know each other. She is the chair of the DNC's Council on Environment and Climate Crisis and works on the ground with these issues. I'd love to hear from Michelle from her perspective.
Sure. I'd like to start by saying that it's such an honor to be here with climate champion and Green New Deal leader, Senator Markey, and also to be part of another incredible event organized by the Dems Abroad, Environment and Climate Crisis Council, and the Dems Abroad. You all do such incredible work, and we know in the last election made the difference in swing seat after swing seat and in swing states. So thank you, and I especially appreciate all this as a former Peace Corps volunteer who lived overseas and voted from Kenya. And so thank you to Chair McDevitt Pugh and Chair Freiling for your leadership and the privilege of getting to work with you. And really, the most straightforward answer to the question is just echoing what Senator Markey has already said, which is if we don't reelect the president, we will see a reversal of the last 3 years of progress. We're also going to see a reversal of the last 3 decades worth of progress. And I'm not just talking about the climate crisis. I'm talking about our rights, our freedoms, our democracy, and the climate crisis. And all of those are so intersectional, as you know. And this is not abstract. If we look at what Trump and the Republicans did last time they had power, domestically, Trump rolled back 100+ key environmental protections via executive action. And that included removing protections for wetlands, reducing limits on vehicle and power plant air pollution, a policy which, according to The Guardian, resulted in 22,000 deaths globally in 2019 alone. So those emissions too, the heating they cause, they don't go away, they're cumulative. So, and on the global stage, the previous president withdrew us from the Paris Climate Agreement. He reneged on our important US contribution to the Green Climate Fund, which helps countries of the global South to reduce emissions and become more climate resilient. And that left other countries from New Zealand to Poland to make up the difference, some of them ending up paying up to 5 times their original commitment. So not surprisingly, his actions on climate domestically and internationally really damaged our credibility as global leaders. The second time around would only be worse, much worse, I am afraid. He's given us every indication of that. So by contrast, as Senator Markey said eloquently, this president, and also let's give credit to the Democrats in Congress, like Senator Markey, they passed the largest ever investment in fighting the climate crisis in the history of the world. President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement on his very first day in office. And he's centered fighting the climate crisis and also crucially upholding environmental justice up and down his government. We see this in the whole of government approach, demonstrated by a lot of executive orders, including the one tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, issued within the first few weeks of his administration. And we see the involvement of agencies in the government that had not historically or traditionally been involved in climate and environmental justice issues, the SEC, NASA. Just last week, the White House, and I think this is crucial, they issued a new playbook to guide all government agencies to develop their own environmental justice strategic plans, not just climate action plans, important too, but environmental justice. So here's the thing, and I think this will be music to Senator Markey's ears. We need to not only reelect the president and vice president, but we also need to give them a Democratic House and Senate. Right now in 23, we've got chair people in the House, chairs of key committees who are climate deniers, deflectors, delayers. The Speaker of the House is a climate denier. So we got to make sure we remember, as Senator Markey again said, this is the most important election of our lifetimes for climate, and I think for our country.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We have a lot of issues to cover in a short period of time. I would like to hand the podium over to Sam to pose the next question, which I'd like both of you to respond to. Sam?
Sure. So earlier this month, transitional committee members largely agreed to a new draft framework for a new loss and damage fund. How can this fund help finance climate justice efforts abroad? And do you see any parallels between this new fund and Biden's environmental justice initiatives back home?
And Michelle, would you like to take that on first?
Yeah, sure. I think, we're past the point where there's any one solution, one bill, one initiative or treaty that can reverse the climate crisis. We're at the point where we need an everything and all-out approach. And the Loss and Damage Fund is an important step. And I'm very pleased that the US signed on last week. Increasingly, communities across the US and internationally, which have contributed the least to the climate environmental crisis, are being disproportionately harmed by it. And I'm sure that many of the people on this Zoom call are experiencing this in the countries where they live. It's unjust, and the injustice only gets worse as the climate crisis escalates. And moreover, as these communities and countries address the impacts of the climate crisis, from floods to drought to food insecurity, they end up having fewer resources for other pressing problems like housing insecurity and healthcare, which are again intersectional with the climate crisis, and fewer resources to reduce their own emissions. So, domestically, the Biden-Harris administration has been dedicated to addressing this issue from the beginning and has made climate and environmental justice a key pillar of its climate initiative, with over 200 actions, rescinding the previous administration's egregious environmental rollbacks, which I mentioned, and implementing a really ambitious environmental justice agenda. The President's Justice 40 initiative, so well named, it directs at least 40% of the benefits of federal climate, sustainable housing, and clean energy investments to historically and currently marginalized communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous, poor, white, so that they can benefit from the clean energy future and be prepared for the impacts of climate change. Last week, as I said, the US confirmed support for the International Loss and Damage Fund, which is absolutely an extension of the social, racial, gender, and economic justice initiatives central to the Biden-Harris administration. It also builds on the Democratic Party's platform, which has a commitment to the US doing its fair share to keep global heating to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, addressing the gaps between rich and poor countries' ability to respond to the climate crisis has been a fundamental issue in global climate policy since the very beginning. And it has to be, as a matter of ensuring justice and also of ensuring a sustainable future. Countries of the global south have contributed far less by any metric. So we need to start working on that 387 billion a year they need to carry out their current adaptation plans. And I think the Loss and Damage Fund is an important step forward.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Senator Markey, would you like to add to that? I know you will be attending the COP conference 28 in Dubai this winter.
Yes, I will be. And when I was growing up in Malden, Massachusetts, there were 8 wards, and every city pretty much has this. And one ward is an environmental sacrifice ward. It's the ward where all the industries are, all the polluters are. And that in Malden was Ward 2, which is where I grew up, which is where I still live. And the Malden River was 3 blocks from my house. And when your mother says to you, Eddie, whatever you do, don't swim in the Malden River, it was because the river was black with a pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze over it. And when your mother tells you not to swim in the river in your neighborhood, you know you're not Tom Sawyer on the Mississippi. You're having a different kind of relationship with nature. Well, every city has that ward, but and that's why the president, that's why the Green New Deal, in fact, was introduced. It was to talk about Black, Brown, Indigenous, environmental justice communities. And in the bill, as Michelle said, 40% of the funding has to go to those communities in our country. And I actually created a green bank that is going to actually wind up with maybe 10,000 environmental projects across the country. And 60% of them have to be in environmental justice communities. And McKinsey, in analyzing the Green Bank, says that's upwards of $200 billion worth of investment. And then globally, we actually have environmental sacrifice islands, environmental sacrifice countries that have never really been part of the industrialized era, and they're going to suffer the worst consequences of it. Islands might just be submerged. You know, these countries are going to see storms with an intensity that forces millions to just relocate. So the United States, you know, and the rest of the industrialized world, we have a responsibility as we head into this COP to make sure that there is a loss and damage fund, that we begin to look at the World Bank, the IMF, other financing institutions in a way that begins to deal with these legacy problems created by countries like the United States, because CO2 is cumulative. It just stays up there. And 25% of the CO2 is red, white, and blue up there in the air. China is producing more now, but they haven't caught up to our historic contribution to this problem. So we just have to arrive seriously at Dubai and just be saying, look, we're starting to do it domestically, but we know we have a responsibility to do it internationally as well.
Thank you so much. I know that we were a long time getting there, but I am proud that the United States is joining in the efforts now. I'd like to turn it over to Angela to pose the third question we prepared. Angela?
Scientists at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, urge us to rapidly accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels. However, fossil fuel subsidies have topped $7 trillion this year, in a year, according to the IMF. How could a cover decision in Dubai calling for the phase down or even phase out of all fossil fuels influence policymaking in Congress?
Well, here's the good news. The good news is last year, for the first time, globally, more money was invested in solar than in oil. First time. And it'll never be the same. Solar, wind, they're just deploying at rapid rates. However, you know, the goal has to be not just phase down, but phase out of fossil fuels, because that's the only way we're going to avoid the worst, most catastrophic consequences of global warming. So it's very important that that the industrialized nations listen to those countries which have been most adversely impacted. And I intend on making that my goal when I'm there, and advocating for the rapid, phase down, but phase out. You know, one of the problems that we're going to have is that the chair of the COP in Dubai is also the president of the oil company in Dubai. You know, so that gives him, let's just put it like this, a little bit of a conflict of interest, especially since he's raised the goal from 4 million barrels of oil a day produced in his country up to 5 million barrels of oil a day. That's the host. So the business model of the country that is the host is actually at odds with what, our goal has to be, to phase down and then out fossil fuels. So that's what I'm going to be advocating. And ultimately, that's what the IRA is all about. And that's what we have to do, is just have this rapid technological transition that we can then export around the world the way we did with iPhones. We're now 800 million people in Africa have one on their possession, right? That has to be the speed with which we act to make this technological transition.
The U.S. needs to also, but we still have a ways to go. I want to hear what Michelle has to say regarding this very important question.
Well, I agree with Senator Markey, which won't surprise you. And I do want to say, with regard to the fossil fuel subsidies, that President Biden ran on ending fossil fuel subsidies. And we remain hopeful this will happen. We are pushing the administration to do so, as we're also urging the U.S. to transition off fossil fuels onto clean, safe renewables. The subsidies they're bad policy, bad economics, and bad for the planet. And we should be leading here, and can and must. I think Angela mentioned, that fossil fuel handouts hit a global high in 2022. At the same year, big oil made, $4 trillion in income. In the US, we're paying $20 billion a year, approximately annually, in fossil fuel subsidies. We should not be making handouts to an industry that's using our sky as an open sewer, and that poisons our land and water and darkens our future. So an industry that's lied to us, we now know, for decades about the consequences of burning fossil fuels. So President Biden has been on the right side of this issue, has called recently for ending fossil fuel subsidies. And here at home, we need to make that a reality.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of questions from the audience in the Q&A, and I would like to open it up to some of those questions. I'm looking at the list now. Up there, one of the first to get in was Uma Krishna Swamy out of the UK, and has raised an interesting point. Have there been conversations about the probability of migration as a result of climate change, and the role that the global community and the U.S. in particular ought to play in minimizing traumatic displacements in the worst hit regions, and also in recognizing them when they do occur?
Well, that's a very good question. And 2 years ago, I introduced the first climate refugee bill. Because right now, climate refugees don't qualify for refugee status the way refugees from war would. But we know that there are going to be, according to the United Nations, upwards of 50 million, climate refugees, maybe more, most likely more. And we have to absolutely ensure that there is refugee status that attaches to these people. It's beyond their control. They didn't do it. Matter of fact, their own country probably didn't do it. But because of the rapidly changing climate, because of fossil fuels, because of what human beings have done in the industrialized world, these refugees are going to be created. So absolutely, it's why I introduced my legislation and why I continue to get more co-sponsors on the legislation, because we're going to reach that point very, very quickly. And we need to harness all the benefits of the IRA. We have to make sure it doesn't get repealed. We have to reduce the greenhouse gases that go up into the atmosphere, and we have to develop the technologies that then we can share with less developed countries, and to do so as rapidly as possible. But excellent question.
Very important. Michelle, do you have something?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, first of all, thank you so much for that bill, and for making that a centerpiece of our conversation going forward, because it is important. And there's also going to be internal migration within the US and relocation. In fact, there are already Alaska Native communities that have had to relocate due to rising sea levels. And we're going to see, I'm afraid, more and more of that. I live in Michigan. We are acutely aware of this. We've been told that we are a state that many people are likely to move to. And this is where you get into how this is all intersectional with our housing crisis in this country and throughout much of the global north. We need to make sure that people, when they choose to relocate, can do so with dignity, ideally as communities, and are supported in that. So we have a lot of work to do.
Angela, would you like to take another question from the Q&A for us?
Yes, I would. We have a question from Ed, which I think is a really good question. How do we use the Green New Deal to strengthen the loss of working class votes from the GOP? How do we get those people back?
By the way, thank you for that question, Ed. Two Eds are better than one, so we got a good confluence here right now. So what we say over and over and over again in the Green New Deal is they should be union jobs. What the president did in so many parts of the IRA was he attached requirements that actually give more benefits if the jobs that are created are union jobs. So that's the goal that the president has. He's the most pro-union president in the history of the United States, and the IRA is helping to create a transition that will lead to the creation of hundreds of thousands of union jobs, and we just have to keep them in office. I mean, it's driving a lot of corporations crazy. As you just saw, it's very interesting. The UAW strike, it was about higher wages as the transition is being made to the all-electric vehicle. The UAW was also trying to, now focus on unionizing battery plants all across the country. And you may or may not have noticed this, but after they cut the deal to increase wages and benefits and job protections for Ford and General Motors and Stellantis, a week later, Toyota and Honda said they were going to introduce their benefits and protections, even though they're not unionized. So just having Joe Biden there and having, and the fact that he has the back of union workers is very important, because he knows that we can build manufacturing centers with union jobs in purple states all across the country, in red states all across the country, these clean energy jobs just don't know any party affiliation. And the more that they're created in purple and red states, is the more quickly those states are going to transition over to being Democratic states in the future.
Well, Michelle's certainly in the thick of it in Michigan. And you have been, I think, out there with the picket line, marching with the auto workers.
Yeah,
Do you have
with my fellow
thoughts you'd like to share?
With my fellow UAW members, although I don't work for the big three myself. I think Senator Markey really hit the nail on the head about how the president had committed to ensuring that the new green energy jobs are union, good paying, family sustaining union jobs, and is delivering on that. Had supported the UAW in its strike, which is benefiting, as unions do, not only the union members, but all workers. And really important that they did do that work to ensure that the people in these EV batteries factories are also going to be protected by union contracts. Absolutely crucial going forward. We need to make sure that that continues. And super important that we reelect President Biden and Vice President Harris and continue with this. And I would say also that so many of the benefits of not just IRA, but the bipartisan infrastructure bill, et cetera, are flowing to red areas, to rural communities like mine in Michigan. And the benefits of that are beginning to really play out. And we're seeing, broadband coming to communities where kids were having to do homework in their cars outside of McDonald's because there was Wi-Fi there. So, et cetera. I think all of that is going to be super helpful.
Beautiful. And I can take one more question. We're actually having a big lunch with the all Democratic senators on the continuing resolution to deal with whether or not the government's going to shut down at the end of the week. So we're going to have
Thank you for that, Mr.
It's starting right now, but I can take one more quick question if anyone has one.
Sam, would you like to pose one more question from the audience?
So with topics like climate finance and plans like the Bridgetown Initiative dominating the 2023 news cycle, I think we have a great question from Mohammed. Africa recently had its first Africa-led climate summit in Nairobi, Kenya. As you know, while the global south contributes barely any greenhouse gases, they experience the majority of the adverse effects of climate change. What can the U.S. do outside of the Loss and Damage Fund to help Africa and other communities across the global south?
Well, I think one of the things that we should focus on are the mineral-rich countries in Africa. We're going to need a partnership with countries to provide the materials that are going to be used for the new green energy technologies globally. And Africa is poised to have an economic explosion around these issues. Now, we'd want the mining and manufacturing all to be done with environmental safeguards. But there's a lot to be done now in economic partnership. China has been in Africa for years. It's time for the United States to start to become much more aggressive in this and to partner in a responsible way with countries around the world so that we can create supply chains that provide the minerals, the materials which we need. And moreover, we have to find financing mechanisms in order to make sure that there can be a rapid transition and access to clean energy technologies to be deployed in African countries. And ultimately, the World Bank just has to do a better job. They just have to stop financing of fossil fuel technologies, move over to wind, to solar, to geothermal, move over to technologies that are absolutely the gift that Africa has. And we have to help them in order to maximize those natural, renewable energy and natural, naturally occurring minerals that exist in Africa, all towards telescoping the time frame that children would have to look to the history books to find that there ever was such a thing as global warming. And Africa can play a big role, but we have to be intentional in the same way we were intentional in writing the IRA in terms of environmental justice. We have to be intentional globally as well and press the IMF, the World Bank, but private financial institutions as well to look to Africa.
Well, fortunately, we have a new leader.
I thank all of you so much for everything that you're doing, and your perspective is global too. You can pick it up, how much more respect that the United States has with Joe Biden as president than they had with Donald Trump. They know that they have someone who wants to partner. They know that rather than trying to disassemble NATO, he tried to put it together, and he's done a great job now in pushing back on Russia. And it's absolutely critical that we allow him the latitude to do the same thing on NATO, on partnership with countries around the world to solve the problems that continue to vex our nation. Donald Trump will not do that. Donald Trump believes that he's going to make America great again by making America hate again. And we can't allow that to happen domestically or internationally. Thank you all so much for everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Senator Markey, for joining us today. It means the world to us all over the world, and getting out the vote and getting out the climate vote to help the Biden administration finish the job for the U.S. and the benefit of the whole planet. Thank you so much.
Much appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Michelle, would you like to take a crack at this last question, which is so important, from Mohammed Ahmed in Kenya, where I know you served as a Peace Corps volunteer some time ago?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the question that Senator Markey just answered?
The question that Senator Markey just answered, I can repeat it. Let me find it.
Maybe we should ask Michelle a different question.
I actually
Okay.
feel like Senator Markey handled it really well. I'm not sure I actually have a lot to add. He's awesome, isn't he?
Yes, he's
He
great.
is amazing. We were truly blessed to have him, both of you, with us today. Okay, from Meredith Wheeler in France, says that science shows that carbon capture programs we hear so much about might be just pipe dreams at the moment. How can we stop oil companies from greenwashing with this?
Yeah, that is an excellent point to bring up and an excellent question. And the science is increasingly pointing out the way toward a conclusion that not only are these huge carbon capture programs, just to back it up a little bit, the plan is to capture carbon from a variety of sources, from factories to point of source to farms, carbon and carbon equivalents, and to build big pipelines and also to capture it directly out of the air, and then to sequester the carbon somewhere after building huge pipelines to carry it places, pipelines that will extend across much of the US and would completely dwarf in their size and scope our current fossil fuel pipelines. And yes, science is increasingly saying that not only is especially the idea of capturing carbon directly out of the air hugely expensive compared to, say, just replacing fossil fuels with wind and solar, but it is possibly not going to be even a net zero project when you take into account the entire carbon footprint of creating this infrastructure. So I would say we need to pay attention to the science. We're going to try different ideas. I'm all about, let's go ahead and keep investing in research. But we cannot count on unproven technologies, and we know what to do. We know that wind and solar and increasingly geothermal are safe, clean, renewable technologies, and that's where our investments need to go into. And we cannot count on abating carbon emissions with unproven technologies.
Angela, would you like to pose a question from the Q&A?
Yes, Carol Moore has a question. She wanted to know what do you expect to be achieved at the COP28?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately in the lead up to this, as I imagine many of you have. And this COP28 summit is unique. It's an approximate halfway point, 7 years from the original 2015 signing of the Paris Climate Agreement, and then which set goals for 2030, and we're now 7 years from there. So it's halfway point between those two. And it features the first ever global stocktake of progress since the Paris Agreement. So that's the draft of that report, the first set of conclusions, which were published in September. You may remember how sobering the conclusions were about our efforts so far to confront climate change and environmental injustice. So, at COP28, countries are supposed to deliver a rapid response plan to the global stocktake. And we're going to need them to do it at a scope and scale that we have not seen before, because we've procrastinated globally and in the US, which is the world's largest oil and gas producer. We now have to ramp it up much more. Every year of delay means needing to act much faster in the next year. So, I'm hoping there'll be really strong, good responses to the global stocktake. I'm hoping that we will get good commitments to the loss and damage fund. They are voluntary, but I'm hoping they will be large and strong and will give the Global South the resources that it needs to respond to the disasters inflicted upon them by the climate crisis. And I'm hoping for a good plan for what happens at COP29, which I understand we don't actually know yet where that's going to be. It's supposed to be in Eastern Europe, right?
Right.
And because of the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, there's tension around where that will happen. So those are the things I'm hoping for. But I would invite like Dana and Angela and others to jump in if they have responses too. I know all of you are thinking about this very deeply.
I'd like to hear what Sam has to say. He has been attending COPs regularly as a climate negotiator. One of our panelists, Sam Goodman, who's calling in from Costa Rica. So maybe you'd like to chime in, Sam.
I think in terms of the anticipated results, yesterday we heard some encouraging news coming from the European Union that they plan to make a sizable commitment in terms of the loss and damage finance. I think the big thing is the trying to get the global stocktake right. This is the first ever conclusion of a global stocktake. So if we get the global stocktake right, it can set us on a path forward to more ambitious climate commitments in the future. So that's a really big priority. I know it doesn't look great based on what happened at the G20 this year, but a phase down in global fossil fuels, all global fossil fuels would be great. And if we can reach consensus and move forward with the operationalization of the loss and damage fund, I think those would be the three key priorities at COP, and also trying to get more countries to contribute to climate finance, because we need all hands on deck for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, particularly from developed countries.
Yeah, you're a real hand. You have always providing great insight and guidance for us at the ECCC. I'm wondering, I think we have time, barely have time for one more question. And this is a good one from Hamza Vargas. What are there for potential goals for this Biden second term? If we continue, if we manage to take the House and Senate, is there any merit to a national carbon tax? What are next steps that we can take to really tackle this crisis in a serious way?
Well, I would advocate that we need to declare a national climate emergency. And that's something the president can do, and it would unlock substantial statutory powers that would enable him through executive orders to address the crisis. There is a great report from the Center for Biological Diversity, I think it's called The Climate Emergency President, that enumerates all of the things that he could do. And that's something that the DNC Climate Council and the DA ECCC have both been advocating for. So I think that would be a great first step forward domestically, but it would also have, as you can see if you go to that report, international implications, because it would unlock powers through the Defense Act for work on international trade, finance, and greening our overseas military facilities. Military is a huge contributor to the carbon footprint of the US. So, we need to stop the fossil fuel subsidies. For that, we're going to need Congress as well as the president. So getting back to Senator Markey saying, we've got to reelect the president. We've got to hold on to the Senate, which now that Joe Manchin is not running again, poses a greater challenge. We need to flip the House back. We have several opportunities to do so. And so, I imagine seeing the Biden administration, the president working hard to ensure that happens. And I think I would love to see more, several of the once we get Congress, several of the Green New Deal bills that have been proposed, including co-sponsored by Senator Markey for housing, for education, get passed and implemented.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I know you and I and our councils have cooperated in putting together a petition for the president to declare a climate emergency, which is going forward. We need to make sure that Democrats are elected up and down the ballot. We need to finish the job, and there's a big job left to finish. I am so grateful for your presence here today, your incredible wisdom and experience and activism, Michelle. And thank you for everybody joining us today. I'm afraid we're at the top of the hour, so we will say good night now. Please do check out the recording and tell your friends who've missed it. They can see this recording on YouTube. And January is coming up. All of you who are outside the United States, it's critically important. Request your ballots early. Participate in the primaries. Let's get Democrats elected and make sure we have a chance of saving our future and our role in it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I put my email in the chat and would love to stay in touch with people. Take care.
Thank you.